The wheel of time turns,
and ages come and pass,
leaving memories that become legend.
Legend fades to myth,
And even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again. In one age,
called the third age by some,
an age yet to come,
an age long past,
a wind rose in the mountains of mist.
the wind was not the beginning
There are neither beginnings nor endings,
to the turning of the wheel of time,
but it was
a beginning.
I kind of, for editing, like having the two different tracks because it makes it kind of nice when we talk over each other to be like, all right, what, one of us is saying doesn't matter, I'll just mute it. But
Welcome to the next episode of Another Turning.
today we're going to discuss what we think the rating for the TV show should be, using some evidence from the books, some evidence from what people have said, and just kind of largely our opinions because that's what this show is.
Yeah, it's been a huge thing that a lot of people I think have talked about, or at least have been thinking about with the upcoming TV show. A lot of people, I think what causes there to be such a question about rating is, and even me, they read the books at a young age. And the way Robert Jordan does his writing, it's almost a beautiful thing in my mind that when you finish the series, you think, oh yeah, that's fine for kids to read. I read it when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read it for the first time as an adult, you're more likely to notice that there's a lot of stuff that is quite dark or it's not appropriate for children. So
Yeah, I think it's that dissonance that's being created between, like, I read this when I was 14 years old, I read it in high school, and then you're looking at, like, fantasy shows that are coming out, and you have The Witcher and Game of Thrones, which are obviously mature, and then you have shows like Shannara, the Shannara Chronicles that came out, which was, I think, probably a TV-14 show. You also have, like, The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings movies, so it's that kind of question of, like, where should this fit?
Well, I guess first starting off, I know you looked it up, but let's go based purely on what's in the book to start, I think.
Yeah, well, let's go over what these ratings are. So we're going to skip over the first few, like the first one, TVY, which is for children, TVY7, which is children 7 and up. TVG is suitable for all ages. I think we're going to skip over those unless you really think they should make this a children's show.
Yeah.
So we'll start with TVPG, which I still think is probably low, but this is, I'm just on the Wikipedia article here. This program contains material that parents may find unsuitable for younger children. It may include some inappropriate language, very little sexual content, suggestive gut dialogue, and or mild violence. So I don't know that anybody's really arguing for that. I don't know that I've seen anybody really say TVPG. I don't know if you've seen that anywhere.
I have not. I haven't heard anything, and I think it'd be kind of laughable. I'd almost think a spin-off that was PG might be funny, but
I don't know. It makes me, when I think TV PG fantasy, it makes me think of, and almost nobody in our audience is going to know what I'm talking about, I swear. But when we were younger, we had that DVD of, like, the Dragonlance cartoon movie. Do you know what I'm talking about?
True.
That's what it thinks of. When I'm like, Wheel of Time PG, that's what came to mind immediately, was that cartoon. And I mean, it wasn't terrible, but
Oh, I was thinking more like Dragon Tales or something like that, where everybody's just playing pretend. So it's hilarious.
Wheel of Time, the Rugrats edition.
Exactly.
All right. So then the real question here then comes down to, will it be TV-14 or TVMA? So TV-14 is, this program contains some material that many parents would find unsuitable for children under 14 years old. FCC warns that parents are cautioned to exercise some care in monitoring this program and are cautioned against letting children under the age of 14 watch unattended. Programs with this rating contain crude humor, drug-alcohol use, inappropriate language, strong violence, may include some amount of blood and gore, sex, and moderate suggestive themes or dialogue. As opposed to TVMA, so this program is specifically designed to be viewed by adults and therefore may be unsuitable for children under 17. This rating is very seldom used by broadcast networks or local television stations due to FCC restrictions on program content, although it is commonly applied to television programs featured on certain cable channels and streaming networks for both mainstream and softcore programs. Programs with this rating commonly include dark humor, frequent use of profanity, intense violence, may include blood and gore, and or strong sexual themes. Looking at those descriptions, I mean, there's a few things we're looking at. I think language, violence, sexual content, I feel like the drug and alcohol use thing we could maybe address if you want, but those would be the issues that would determine what these are. That sounds about right to sum up what we're looking at.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. Those are the categories. Obviously, just talking about why, it's definitely got to be TV-14 is just the concept of drug and alcohol use is in the TV-14 category. And you could get rid of alcohol use, but then it's like destroys part of the world. It's like not having trees in a forest is not having alcohol in a fantasy sometimes. Like, I'm going a little extreme, but...
I mean, they could do it without it. They could very easily, have them there drinking from tankards and you don't know what they're drinking. But I also don't see how you can get away from the violence. Like, you're gonna have blood and gore. I don't think you can tone the violence down to just mild violence.
Yeah, I agree. My thinking of not being TV-14 or higher is the whole somebody just got stabbed but there's no blood that you see in some cartoons or other things like that are supposed to be for children.
Right. I think that would be the big difference. So I think we can easily agree, and I assume our audience will agree, that it's at least TV-14.
Definitely.
All right. So let's start. Drug alcohol use. Now, this is an interesting one if we wanted to talk about it just briefly, because a lot of streaming services have been cutting down on the amount of tobacco use shown. This was a big issue after the latest season of Stranger Things, where they were like, Hopper can't smoke anymore and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think they'll maybe cut out some of the pipe smoking
Honestly,
from the show?
I don't see the reason why. Unless they were trying to go for a small child rating. I don't know what cigarette smoking or tobacco smoking, because it's all pipes in Wheel of Time, what that actually would affect for TV rating.
I don't know that it affects the ratings so much. Once we get to any of that, it's drug use, so it's TV-14. But I think it's just something they're trying to discourage. So I just wonder if that's something they're going to play down. Considering it's not even a huge focus in the first couple books. It's just later that everybody's suddenly smoking. Sometime between book 2 and book 5, everybody has a pipe.
Look, women have their knitting and men have their pipes when they're just chilling. That's what they do in the Wheel of Time.
So I don't know. It's just an interesting thing to think about, because I really don't think it affects it negatively to tone down the amount of smoking in it. But on the other hand, there's just iconic characters. Could you imagine Gandalf without his pipe?
Yeah. I feel like pipes are less offensive than cigarettes in some weird way. I feel like it's more likely to get in if somebody's smoking a pipe because it's...
Because kids aren't smoking pipes. Well, they're not smoking tobacco in pipes.
The original Sesame Street, because the Cookie Monster had a pipe in one of his scenes, and if I remember right, this was a few years back.
Really?
The
Cookie Monster?
Supposed to be a detective or something, if I remember right. And the first season of Sesame Street now has an adult content warning because of that. So, who knows?
Interesting. Yeah. Anyway, that's something to think about. Alright, let's move on to language, because this has been, well, I guess not recently anymore, but a few weeks back, this was a big debate.
Oh, yes, definitely. It's an interesting one, and it's very varied on opinion.
I was expecting that. So this was, May 12th, so almost a month ago. I ran a poll on our Twitter about this, and I was interested. I thought it would be kind of varied, and it turns out it really wasn't. So I did, do you think the show should be the Wheel of Time swearing, real word swearing, or some combination? 80% of the results said just Wheel of Time swearing.
I think that's partially because, most of the people who are going to react to the polls we put up are people who have read the series at least once, if not multiple times. And this goes back to why I think people get a confusion almost of how bad Wheel of Time is there isn't any swearing. And our minds, I think, connect, swearing to adult content. And it's part of the charm of Wheel of Time. I'm in the keep the Wheel of Time swearing. Maybe, if you want to add in, crap, or a couple of those really mild ones to be used instead of,
See, I'm almost the opposite. I think I want it to be mostly Wheel of Time swearing. But there are scenes where a character is supposedly using a very, very harsh swear word, where it's Elaine, and Nynaeve's point of view will be she couldn't believe the words coming out of Elaine's mouth. And it either just won't say what she says, or it'll be something ridiculous, like bloody buttered onions. I would like those replaced with real world swearing, because I think the contrast between like, oh, the entire time they're saying flaming this and blood and ashes and, you know, that kind of content, and then out of nowhere somebody drops an F-bomb, then it's going to actually come across as severe and harsh swearing.
I feel like will just cause a disconnect, and the reasoning for that is like by the time you get to most of that stuff, those are not even first season Wheel of Time stuff. The first season, if we're assuming they're covering the whole first book and parts of the second book, maybe some prequel stuff. Still not 100% sure on any of that because nothing's confirmed.
Mm-hmm.
But none of the really crazy swearing is till later. And I think that was when he was writing, he just built on it, and it maybe was a personal joke. And I like it that way. It's like, it's a social commentary on the concept of swearing in my mind, which I actually enjoy that about it when you look at it deeply.
Well, there's, some really interesting ones. I was talking with somebody about this, and they were like, I don't know, Mother's Milk in a Cup sounds super silly to us, but when you think about it, that is a really offensive thing to say.
Yeah.
Like, that's gross. Or Goat Kisser. Goat Kisser is just as bad as, like, Mother Effer. Like, yeah, that sounds pretty bad when you think about it, actually.
And that's what I like it. It's a social commentary on why do we give words power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I look at it. And we have these words that are so strictly evil or horrible. And in Wheel of Time, it's showing that it's more of the connotation. It's how you use it, when you use it. So it doesn't matter what the words are.
I think, well, the thing is, and to kind of give a counterpoint, because I think both of us are kind of on the same side of this, it can come across kind of silly. So a good example of this in another series that had happened, when the Maze Runner books got adapted, the swearing they use is, I think it's shuck. That sounded so stupid when it got adapted. But my theory there is that it sounds like a euphemism for trying to drop the F word, but you don't want to say the F word.
Yeah.
I think that's why it sounds silly. Where Wheel of Time swearing is like, actually sounds like something somebody would say.
Yeah, and again, like I said, is in the earlier ones, it can be sticking to the bloody this, bloody that, flaming. There's stuff that, well, bloody we've heard in British stuff, in Harry Potter it's used.
Mm-hmm.
Flaming, I think it'll be easy to come across what it is, and saying light or peace as a sort of curse or...
Right, it makes sense in world.
And it'll come across early on, and then when you get to those, like, at first maybe it's like somebody just said something that was vulgar, and they don't tell you what it is, and then later when they do say it, yeah, it's comical, but it's a comical way that doesn't take it away, because nobody uses cursing in a situation that, like, that comedy would take away from it.
Of those serious, harsh swears, I like Mother's Milk in a Cup, but bloodied butter, onions, and summered ham I could do without. I think they are dumb. I don't think those ones make sense, but I do like the idea of leaving in, like, one of those ridiculous ones as just kind of an Easter egg to book fans, like, haha, they just said Mother's Milk in a Cup, I remember that, you know?
It
Might
depends.
be kind of fun.
Depends on how they use it, because if we're speaking about specifically Elaine, it would be fun to use her for a couple of those things, and if they do it...
Well, because hers, it's supposed to be comedic. It's like, look at this silly girl, doesn't know how to use swearing properly.
Yeah, and depending on how they frame it, it might be like, Summer Ham doesn't make sense, but you don't realize maybe it's because she only heard half of it, and maybe there's more to it that would make it make sense more. There's ways they can play with it to make it work better.
Yeah, maybe. But what's interesting is one of the things you said was that, like, oh, Wheel of Time fans might just be so used to it. So there is a Facebook group I'm on for, like, making polls and things to ask people things. So I put this up on there, and I phrased it a little differently. I said, you're a fan of an adult fantasy or sci-fi book series, and the characters use curse words outside of our real-world curses. What would you use in the show? Would you use the book curses or real-world swearing? And still there, it was overwhelmingly in favor of book cursing, even without having a specific book in mind.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Whereas, like, times I've done this before, like we talked a little bit last week about weekly versus binge release. And when, you know, every time that poll goes around the Wheel of Time fandom, it's overwhelmingly in favor of weekly releases. And I had done something similar for that and made it a general poll. And that one, binge, won out. So, like, that was one where people were thinking of something specific. They maybe favored it. But in this case, it was very overwhelmingly in favor of the original swearing.
Just to touch on both of them a little bit, I think, real quick, is when you leave it open is, I think, if you just say, hey, you're a huge fan of this thing, people's instinct reaction, without actually thinking realistically when it's just a generalization, is they want it to be as 100% to the book as possible. So when you don't give specifics like that, they're more willing to live in a fantasy in their head of it's going to be 100% like the books. That might be true, it might not. And similar to the binge versus weekly is when it's just something you're a huge fan of might be coming a show, like I kind of talked about it, is I just want to absorb that as quickly as possible. So your true feeling as a viewer, and even if you maybe asked some of the people who are in the weekly group, they're like, as a viewer, I want to watch it all in one sitting nonstop. But as a community, weekly is much better.
You want to experience
so
it together.
when you do it non-specific in a blind poll, so to speak, people are more willing to be true to their true feelings. That's my opinion.
Maybe.
So.
I think it's interesting, and I wish I had saved some of the comments people had said on this, because it was a lot of comments about it helps with the world building, it makes it feel real. For me, the main reason I don't like real world swearing is it takes me out of it. I think that's part of the immersion. If I'm like watching this fantasy scene unfold and, let's picture the scene where they're running towards Shadar Logoth, right? You have like they're trotting along on their horses and it's a beautiful moonlit night and you hear a horn off to the side and you hear Moraine say something like there's Trollocs coming and the Matt just drops the F-bomb. That's going to take me out of the scene.
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, what?
Honestly, one thing that can be done in fantasy type things sometimes, or it's not necessarily fantasy, but things that are supposed to take place in an older time period, is I actually almost prefer when the words that we think of curses are used properly, like crap, or because I try to keep the language good on this, the S word being used specifically talking about feces.
Or like using the B word for female dog, the A word for like a donkey.
Yeah.
That doesn't bother me.
I kind of almost like when they use them like that, and then if their curses are other things, because it shows that this is completely different.
Yeah, I think it helps with that. Like I said, it helps build the world. It helps with the suspension of disbelief. It takes you out of our world and into a different world.
Exactly.
And language is a big part of that.
In no fantasy world should the F word exist. It makes no sense. I don't know where it came from. Well, I've read things. I don't remember.
I actually don't know the etymology of that word. I know some of them.
But yeah.
I'm curious about it now. But yeah, so I mean, technically, as far as swearing goes, it could be a TV PG show.
Yeah, it could. And that's, again, like I said, it's a wonderful social commentary on how we give words strength. Is you could be using words in a TV show, and like you said, Maze Runner, it's obvious they're trying to just replace. But in something like Wheel of Time, you could be using curses that would be like saying you're a son of a to somebody, that level of a curse. But because it doesn't use our words, it's PG.
Well, it's son of a goat. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. All right, that's language. Do you want to talk about sexuality and nudity or violence next?
I think we should use the sexuality and leave the sexuality and nudity for last, because there's probably the biggest conversation there, in my opinion.
Okay, yeah, this actually might be a point we disagree on, maybe.
We disagree. We agree, but in different ways, I think.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about violence then.
So violence. This one, and honestly, because I read the books the first time forever ago, and it wasn't. I didn't do a reread until I was a full adult. And yeah, definitely rereading it and thinking about it, because just reading something, I don't think about it while I'm reading it, which is weird, but it's the way I am.
Yeah.
And it's when I start thinking about these topics that I'm like, holy crap, this is horrible. Like, okay, I had to look something up. I know you said you didn't have your book open.
No, I didn't.
But this is the one that stands out for me the most in what might be in the first season. And it's at chapter 6 in The Great Hunt. This is the Trollocs attack at night for people who have, in Shinar, if people who have read the books. And specifically, it's Rand goes down to the dungeons looking for Egwene. And here it is. His eyes fell on the table and he stopped dead. Breathe in and even thought freezing. On either side of the still-burning lamp, as if to make a centerpiece, sat the heads of the guards in two pools of blood. Their eyes stared at him wide with fear, and their mouths gaped in the last scream. Rand gagged and doubled over. Finally, he managed to pull himself erect, scrubbing his mouth with his sleeve. His throat felt scraped raw. He became aware of the rest of the room. Only half-seen bloody lumps of flesh lay scattered through the straw. There was nothing he could recognize as human except the two heads.
Mm-hmm.
So that's early on in book 2.
Yeah.
And nothing before that is that visceral in my mind.
I think there is, and it's interesting. Jordan doesn't focus on the violence when it happens, and I think this is where people kind of get they misconstrue how violent the series is. Like, when Robert Jordan does battle scenes, he doesn't sit there, I mean, he does sometime, and there's some later on, like, I can think of one with Perrin that does this, but he doesn't sit there and explain all the blood and the gore. He doesn't sit there and talk about, like, that as much, but he does really focus on the aftermath a lot. And that's exactly what that scene is. Like, there was the scene shortly before that of them fighting the Trollocs, which didn't have that much of the violent and the gore, but then the aftermath of the bodies, that gets described in detail.
I think part of the reason might be also is before that scene specifically, no humans have died. I don't think. Like, I mean, they fought Trollocs and they killed Trollocs, but none of them died.
Not that we know of, although that's something I think...
Or it was off-scene stuff. Like, I mean,
yeah.
There's the Tom with the Murdral, but that is just a whole big flash and they don't see anything happen.
Right. I do think there should be some, like, as far as we know, nobody dies in Emmons Field during Winter Night, which is weird.
Yeah, they're only burning Trolloc bodies. They don't mention... I don't remember if they're mentioned burying any human bodies.
No, they
Tarwin's Gap at the end of the first book is the only real scene where there is stuff, but by the time we enter into that battle, it's a pause in the fighting. So we haven't seen any of the humans fighting and dying, but there's obviously dead bodies littering the battlefield.
Yeah. And I think that's just it. When he writes, he doesn't focus on that. He focuses on people being dead. He doesn't focus on people dying.
Yeah.
And I think that's that difference that creates a disconnect.
Yeah, it's a mixture of, like you said, he doesn't focus on it, and also, I don't know, this is my opinion of it, is hearing the fact that somebody killed thousands of Trollocs, blew them up even. It doesn't seem as visceral as hearing that one person got decapitated, one human being.
Maybe. I mean, there's definitely scenes later on, but if we're just focusing on what's happening in the first season, because I fully believe that, like, they can change the rating from season to season.
They can. They can even change it from episode to episode, technically.
I think that's a weird choice.
When we finish talking about this, I'll go over a couple of things just in general about, like, Amazon Prime, because I was looking at a couple of things and stuff like that. Yeah, Wheel of Time, straight from the book. There's no way, if you want to keep it true to the book, that it's not mature for the violence.
Not if they want to stay true to it. I mean, I was just looking. I don't have my English copy of my book with me. I have the German one, so I won't read you any quotes. But I was just looking over the scene.
Tell me a chapter and I'll look it up.
I was just thinking of the Winter Night chapter, when Rand's, going around the farm to collect things. And that's another one where, like, it's not very, like, viscerally described or anything, but, like, when he goes into the farmhouse again and there's dead bodies and there's, like, everything's destroyed, or when he goes into the barn and all the sheep are dead, like, I guess maybe because it's not human, we don't care as much, or maybe it just doesn't come across as powerfully because we're not, you know.
It's, I think, a mixture.
It's not human?
It's a mixture because, well, with the dead animals, it's nighttime, it's dark out. You don't actually see it. The sheep and stuff are described as just, he sees bumps. It's not until he reaches out and touches one and he feels the warm blood. When he goes into the house, again, they're dead Trollocs. At most, they're already dead. It's not like they were butchered, so it's like there might be blood sprays. You could make it darker.
Right, but that falls into that gore, but I feel like that falls into TV-14 gore, maybe?
Yeah, seeing that afterwards. I think basic gore, this is my opinion on it. Seeing blood and people being harmed like that in a basic fight, like a basic sword fight, they slash each other a couple of times, there's some small cuts, and then one person, even a beheading, if filmed properly, still TV-14.
You could do it very easily.
You get into the adult level of things when you have guts pouring out of people's bodies, dismembered body parts everywhere.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because, like, looking at this description, and again, this is just the Wikipedia article, but the difference between TV-14 and TVMA is strong violence may include some amounts of gore and blood, versus intense violence may include blood and gore. So it's really, really unclear where that line is.
From my understanding, ratings like this are very, very subjective. How things get rated is...
There is a secret council of people in California that determine the rating. We don't even know who they are, like it's super private, and it's just a group of people that get together and decide it. And we don't need to go on my rant about ratings right now, but it's very, very subjective. There's no like objective criteria of what determines what's what.
So like even what we're talking about is, this is the basic stuff from people's extrapolating from different ratings. But ratings have changed also, is because I've seen, it might have been video games, but it's the same almost level of stuff. Is I've seen some of the jokes where it's like, oh, hey, this thing's rated PG or teen or whatever it is, and for nudity, blood, and gore, and then it's the exact same descriptors for another game or video or TV show or movie that's rated higher.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it's interesting, and that it has changed a lot over times, and this is stuff.
And by country,
I would almost prefer to come back, where you're at. And I mean, the U.S. always rates like sex and nudity way higher than they do their violence, which is why I think, even though I agree with you that Wheel of Time is incredibly violent and incredibly gory, even in season 1, I think book 2, Padded Fane, does a lot of stuff. I honestly think the blood and gore for season 1 could fall into TV-14 in the US.
It could. I'm saying if you stay true to how the books are written, it would. I think it would be TV-17. It can easily be adapted slightly. It doesn't need huge changes, but slight things. Like that one scene I read off is, you could just leave the heads there, not in a pool of blood.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be dried already. There's a few changes that will keep it close, but for much easier to drop it into that TV-14 rating.
No, I definitely think when we get to later seasons, it's going to be unavoidable. I'm thinking of like book 6 ending.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that and stay true to it. The last bat. I think there's stuff that comes later that you couldn't stay true and can maintain TV-14. But I honestly think season 1, TV in the US, TV-14 rating for the blood and gore. I think later seasons higher. I think other countries will put it higher, but I think the US will keep it TV just for that TV-14.
I agree for the most part, except if you want it to be good, and close to the book at least. But the thing is you have magic in the Wheel of Time world, and a lot of the more gruesome deaths later on are caused by magic. And you can easily, when you add in magic, it is very easy to make killing people not that gruesome. I know what you're talking about, but if you just disintegrate people, so to speak, with...
No, and that's just it, and it becomes magical violence or fantastical violence, which brings it down. But I'm not even disagreeing with you about what the level of violence is going to be. I think we're on the same page there. I just think it's not actually TVMA violence because American rating systems are really lenient on violence.
Oh, I get that. I'm just saying how you said in later seasons, it would become harder to make it TV-14, but it would still be doable. It would just be the longer they do it, the less good it would be, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. But, and here's where my big line gets drawn, I don't think there's any way for them to stay true to the books. Maybe in season 1. Season 1 is a maybe, but definitely later, without going TVMA for the nudity.
This is again how my personal opinion about things versus what is the real world, and because I feel like I have a much more European view when it comes to nudity, because I'm more okay with it. But yes,
that's my opinion. I think Wheel of Time throughout the books are full of non-sexual nudity.
Yes.
There is bath scenes, sweat tents, just people hanging out naked, And in my opinion, that should not be seen as a mature thing. For what American rating guidelines are, though, if there's a boob, it's mature.
I'd have to look into a lot of detail, and I can't remember exactly, because, well, in movies, I think and I don't know if TV shows are broken up more, is boobs are like R, anything besides boobs is NC-17 sort of thing, which...
It depends on context, and this is like where it gets
muddy.
Wishy-washy, where like a naked woman coming out of a bathtub might be considered TV-14 if you just see her butt and maybe her boobs. Some TV-14 stuff can have boobs. But then, like, if you see below the waist, then it's TVMA. And, like, yeah, if it's a sex scene, it's gonna be, And so, I think it gets very muddled there.
Yeah. And I agree.
I find it hard with the amount of nudity in Wheel of Time, especially in later seasons. But even in season 1, there's at least going to be 2 bath scenes and Nynaeve's testing.
Yeah.
There's enough nudity that, but they could do shots and angles, I guess, to avoid that, if they wanted to.
In all honesty, this show, you could make it TV-14. You can use certain shots, certain angles to make the times when nudity is used, or just cut out nudity altogether because they don't feel like it lends anything.
I really feel like you and I talking right now talked me into a TV-14 rating for the season 1. I went into this being like, it's totally TV mature. And now here I'm like, but they could totally do a TV-14 for the first season.
They can. And, but the thing is it's all based on how they want to approach it. You could make this a TV-14 show. I'm talking the whole book series. It can be done. Now, whether or not it would be the best version it could be, no. I'm not saying it would be...
I don't think after season 1 you could, but...
I'm not saying it would be bad. I'm not saying it would be good. It could be done. But for the best version of Wheel of Time, I'm thinking it has to be in a higher category.
Okay. I do want to real quickly kind of, in terms of like the sex and the nudity and stuff, and I guess the ratings overall. I have 2 quotes. One is Priyanka Bose, who is playing Alana, did a Q&A on Instagram. Now, I don't have a screenshot of this or anything because it was like a video Q&A. But the question was, your daughter is lovely. Has she seen your work and will you let her watch Wheel of Time when it comes out? Her answer was, thank you, I'll let her know that. Yeah, she's wonderful. Yes, definitely. I haven't been able to share a lot of things that I've done with her. And this is something I'm really looking forward to, yeah. And her daughter is, I think, 9, if I remember right. And then Sarah Nakamura, who is like the book consultant, her job is like basically to read scripts and be like, yeah, that wasn't in the book. What are you doing? She, in a chat for a YouTube video, posted talking about her son. We don't actively let him watch sex scenes, but if there's non-gratuitous nudity and it happens that he sees it, he doesn't feel ashamed. If he asks, we talk about it. And this was after she had said she'd let her son watch Wheel of Time. And I don't know how old her son is either. I think he's like 4. So it's just interesting that 2 different people involved in the show have said that they feel comfortable letting their young children watch it.
Yeah, I don't know. It's the same thing, though, is like I read the books and I'd be perfectly happy giving the books to a 12-year-old. And it's weird when you start to put it in a visual medium, and it would be something I'd have to watch first and then make that choice.
Yeah, well, and that's just it. But they are people that have watched it. Now, keep in mind, Priyanka is Bangladeshi, which means she doesn't have the same kind of standards that, like, Americans would have. Like, she's South Asian, so, like, they have very different ideas about violence and nudity than maybe we would because we're American. Sarah Nakamura, however, is from California, so she also might have very different ideas. Who knows?
And nothing against them, obviously. Like, if they're different than us.
No. Just saying that, like, in context, these quotes are maybe, like, can't necessarily be like, yes, every 9-year-old should be allowed to watch this. This is like, there's cultural context and stuff, too. But I just thought it was interesting.
Yeah, no, I just want to put it out there that, it's their choice, and I'm not a parent, so, I can't begin to describe what I would do, and I have nothing against what they think. This show could be super bloody, and if they choose to let their kids watch that, that's their choice.
Right.
And that's where it comes down to, I think, in general, with TV shows at all. That's why I think the ratings are pointless. I feel like it should just be like, hey, as a parent, you should watch it first and then decide if you should let your child watch it if they're younger than the age of like 12. After the age of 12, you can maybe start watching things with them.
I think it's a good idea to have the rating just to be like, if something is rated, TVG, I know I can watch my 10-year-old watch it, but if it's rated TV 14, maybe I want to watch it first. So I do think the ratings are helpful to give you a guideline. But again, we're not parents, so...
And I think it'd be also is it's just like, maybe they should have reviews, they should have descriptions that kind of, this is us ragging on the rating system almost, that, like, it should be better, so it could be more informed, because being informed...
Well, they do have... If you, like, watch something on TV, watch it on Netflix, when it comes up, it'll say, like, TV 14, and then it'll give a couple little tags.
True.
But it's not very detailed. And there's, like, websites you can go on that will give more detailed things. But, yeah, Look, I think we should live in a world where everything comes with content warnings. I think I should open a book, and the first page should be like, this book contains this, this, and this.
Yeah, maybe. But no, okay, specifically with nudity and sexuality, along with this, as I know this, we talked about it together. I don't know if we've talked about it recorded, but I know you've brought it up, or it's been brought up of if they're going to go for the more mature rating, should they have sex scenes or increase the amount of sex that is seen?
And that's, I think, been my fear, which has been one of the things, like, in the past I've said I kind of wish it will be TV 14, just because I think if they've earned that mature rating from other things, if they're like, yeah, the content we're putting in this is going to be TV MA anyway, that they'll add that in. Because when you put a rating on something, granted, like, I mean, Game of Thrones was TV mature, and I know kids that were watching it in high school, right? Like, how much those guidelines, but they do restrict some people. Like, the second it gets that TV mature rating, you're cutting out some of your potential audience. And that's my fear, that they will up the sex to try to recoup some of that lost audience. And if that's the other thing, it would make me think they might go for more swearing and things like that, just to balance out what they've lost. That's my fear.
And I could say it's not completely unwarranted, but the more things are going and the more we hear from the people involved, makes me think they're going to be better, at least when talking about the language. When it comes to sex, though, I'm not 100% sure. I've heard some people on the internet or content creators I've listened to that are really hoping for more sex, and that's their opinion, and maybe it's because I personally don't have a desire to see it too much. Who knows? It could be that they decide to add it in, and me and you are in the minority in thinking that it makes the show bad or less enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of trust them. I think with everything we've seen and heard, I've come to trust Rafe and the team. So that's like a fear I had, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, that I don't have as much now, because I really do think they've earned my trust a little bit.
No, okay, so there was only one other thing I wanted to talk about, because, we're talking about, you said, TV 14, TV 17, and all these sorts of things, and, what I said is interesting is they can, you said they can change rating from season to season. Well, I've seen some shows that hover between, one episode will be like, 18 and over, but then the next episode doesn't have a sex scene, for instance, or something like that, and it'll be a lower rating. And actually on Amazon, looking at some of their, the shows I've watched recently that are originals by them, is, like, The Boys is actually, it says it's 16 plus. And this is what's nice about streaming services. They kind of can put whatever they want on it.
Yeah, they aren't really as restricted as, like, network television is. But I think it's interesting, and I think it might be a good idea. I think a 16 rating would be, like, perfect.
Yeah, because then The Hunters is 18 plus. So...
yeah, if that's how they do their ratings on Amazon, then I think a 16 would be good.
I don't know. I almost think going 18, but... I don't know if I can look at specific... Yeah, this is it. The Hunters. Episode 1 is 18 plus and episode 2 is 16 plus.
I think to me that's just not that useful. Because, like, if the first 2 or 3 episodes are 16, and then the 4th episode is 18, it's like, what, do I just skip the episode if I'm not comfortable seeing that content? Like, I mean, I've done that. Like, I watched The Witcher, and I skipped the sex scenes. I would just, like, fast forward. I was like, I don't want to see them. They're not adding anything to the story. Within that, but I wouldn't skip an entire episode.
Well, this is what's interesting. I just looked at The Boys, which on their show description, their season is rated as 16 plus, but they do have a couple of their episodes that are rated as 18 plus.
Interesting.
So I think having the episode ratings, and I think if something like Wheel of Time that might be hovering right around the border between them, is it'll be like, rate each of their episodes, and I think it's just based on whichever one is the higher number of episodes. So if like 6 of the episodes are 16 plus and 2 of them are 18 plus, the season will be rated 16 plus.
Right.
And I think worrying about a full season rating isn't the thing. It's more of like an episode by episode, and their goal is to aim for, 17-year-olds, so to speak, or,
Right. Well, and I don't think ratings are really, aimed at the target audience necessarily, but
yeah.
I do think overall, based on what you're saying, I think a 16 plus rating for the entire season makes sense. I don't know how much people would be paying attention to those individual episode ratings.
Well, because like you said, at the beginning of an episode, it pops up with that little thing. If you're just binging a show and all of a sudden one pops up and it's like, this is rated 18 plus for sexual content all of a sudden, and there's been no sexual content yet, you can prepare yourself, so to speak.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then this is my whole thing with my opinion on it is, at least when it comes to children watching it, is it's the parents choose whether or not they can watch it. Who cares what it's rated? But for my personal opinion of how good I think it'll be, I think it will be hovering that 16 plus area. I think making it 18 plus, and then again I'd have to look at the details of what changes. Making it every episode is 18 plus would be unrealistic,
I think. Yeah. I do think there will be moments, and we mentioned it when we did our episode 2 predictions. We really want a nice long barrel-on bath scene. They could do that without, showing too much.
I'm one of those people that I promote the idea of non-sexualized nudity, or at least partial nudity, because hiding things or keeping people from things, I truly believe that by forcing people not to be aware of things makes them more interested in it, and it forces people to think, oh my god, that's super naughty or super bad, so that when they're finally able to see it, they're not able to deal with it in a healthy manner.
Yeah,
so to speak.
Yeah, it'll just be interesting, but then that gives them, because they rate individual episodes, it gives them that flexibility to make, episode 6, 5, whatever,
18 plus,
18 plus because
we see beheading people.
Dismembering people, yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. It's interesting that they do it that way. That's cool. All right.
I think that's everything. And I think they'll do a good job. I'm also one of those people where I'm getting better at accepting things will change, but I am still in the camp of make it 100% like the books as much as possible. That's a whole nother conversation, though, with other topics, but
all right.
I think they'll do a good job.
Yeah, I trust them. All right, let us know below or in the comments, or let us know on Twitter, wherever you want to message us. What do you think it should be rated and why?
And if you have a strong opinion about adding certain things, or if they should cut violence out of it more, whatever it is, we're open to hearing anybody's opinion as long as you have, your own reasoning for it.
Yeah. All right. And we'll see you the next time the wheel turns.